What's up, guys? Episode number 4 of the lab tutorial series. I'm going to talk about all the ways to ingest those logs into Azure Sentinel, all the methods available to you to ingest the logs. I'm going to just go over everything I know. So if I don't cover something that you are curious about, feel free to comment and I'll respond. But like I said, I'm just going to go over everything I know in log ingestion, which is quite a bit. And if you're not interested in how, to ingest logs, all these methods, go down to the description and find the one you are interested in, right? I'm going to put timestamps so you can just click at it. All right. And I'm not going to lab all of them, but I'm going to show you as best as I can how to ingest that log so you can just do it. And so it'll be kind of your homework assignment. So some stuff I can show, some stuff I can't, because it's just a lot of stuff to show. All right. So let's get started. Now let's talk about it. When we think about Azure Sentinel, you first have to understand kind of at a high level how it works, right? So let's say we have our cloud here, and let me actually just make this smaller. So we'll just call this the Microsoft Cloud. Now, within this cloud, this Azure cloud, we have logs that we want to ingest into the cloud, right? And Sentinel is going to be sort of that brain. I call it the brain because it's doing a lot of things automatically for us with its AI, its automation. It's going to be the brain that's going to ingest all these logs, understand sort of what we call the entities, the IPs, domains, hosts, and correlate that data across your third-party data, your Microsoft data, whatever data you're bringing in, you can correlate it. And, we can correlate it across, many different entities, as well as you can even customize your own sort of data points, parameters that you want to have available in the alert. Okay. So Sentinel doesn't actually store the logs. It relies on log analytics. Okay. Log analytics is already there. It already exists. And it's already doing the work. So it's already doing a good job. It's built on a database architecture that's very scalable and very robust. So you don't have to worry about building another type of data ingestion service if log analytics is already doing a good job. So Sentinel is going to be the brain using log analytics as the resource. So when you think about ingestion, you're not ingesting into Sentinel, you're ingesting into log analytics. Okay. Now, how do we, let me actually just erase this and just write it a little bit better. We'll call log analytics. It's bad. All right. So it's built on top of log analytics. Okay. Now, how do we actually ingest logs? We use what we call connectors. A connector is a piece of code or a software that will connect your data to us. So let's talk about a connector. So a connector that connects the data could be a piece of software. So it could be just like an agent, right? And it would connect, and the agent would then connect that data to log analytics. And that data source could be a syslog from a Linux machine, or it could be event logs from a Windows server, right? And so these would be your data sources, right? And another way to connect it, a connector would function would be something like an app. It could be an app, a middleware that acts as a medium to facilitate feeding that data to Sentinel. Okay. So that app could be it could be an app, right? And that app could be a logic app, right? Which is like a GUI based programming is the best way to explain it. Flow is another way. Power BI would be another way to hydrate data into Sentinel. You can also have a Python script, right? Just a Python script that will just connect to the API and then feed the data from, through the Python script, and then just call the API and then feed the custom data. You can also have a PowerShell script. It's endless, because if you have an API, you can connect, any kind of app. You can even program it in some kind of software yourself, some custom software, and actually connect to the API. It's very flexible to kind of, connect to API. What else? You can have a Power App. So a Power App would be another good one, right? So there's just many ways to connect the data, right? So through that API interface. Now, another way that you could connect the data is, maybe a webhook. So maybe you have a webhook session. So it could be a webhook where you can have sort of, maybe the third-party app has a way that you can subscribe to a feed, be a consumer of it, establish that webhook connection, and then any messages coming in that webhook, you can then feed to Sentinel, as you're listening. So many different ways to connect that data. And the data sources could be any number of sources as well, because once you have a connector, it just connects the data, but you haven't really identified the sources, right? So for syslog and event, that would be maybe a Windows server, a Linux server, right? That would be the source of, if you have an agent. If you have a API, the source could be any mean that you want to collect. The source could be, also it could be a server. The source could be maybe an event hub, right? That would connect, the connector would just take the data from the event hub and feed it to Azure Sentinel. It could maybe subscribe to the event hub as a consumer and ingest that feed and then feed it over to Sentinel, right? You can also have it be stored in a storage bucket, right? That storage bucket could be a S3 bucket. It could be a blob storage. And now you store it in a bucket as a CSV, JSON, whatever you want. And then the goal is we ingest those logs from that source file. And whether it's been normalized or not, we can then ingest that data and then have it populate in Sentinel. If it's normalized already, then of course it's going to be a better experience when you want to build queries. But if it's not, there are a lot of methods and functions you can leverage to normalize that data, save that data as, or save that query as an alias. That way you could just use that query to join other tables or correlate that data somewhere else, or just have a alias to query to basically retrieve that query that you already built. So you can actually save special queries after you've normalized and structured your data. Okay, now that you know that, let's go into some flows. I'm not going to go into syslog and ceph logs, but I'm going to go and show you sort of the other flows and how you would achieve that. Okay, and how you ingest that to Sentinel. Okay, so let's talk about something very, very simple. Let's talk about storing it, right? Let's talk about storing that data in a bucket. So let's say you store that data in an S3 bucket or a blob storage. That is just going to be storing the data. It's not pulling the data, right? So you need a connector to either retrieve the data from the blob storage, or you need the connector to push the data to Azure Sentinel. Either method, you're going to need to have credentials, right? And you're going to need the credentials to pull the data as well as push it out, right? You're going to need the authorization to perform that task. Now, the connectors we have are already pre-built that when you deploy it, it already comes with, you kind of have to populate the parameters, the workspace ID, the Sentinel workspace, whatever you need that's required for that deployment script. And when you populate it, it'll spin up that connector and hopefully connect the services together, right? So you might need API key and things like that. So again, the connector is very important to connect that data and just make it very easy. So let's talk about the connectors. let's go into Sentinel and show you what it looks like. So let's look at the connectors, okay? Let's look at what is available to us. Now, let's see here. So as you can see, if I click on data connectors on the left side, here's all the connectors you have access to, okay? And if we look, you can see that we're just going to pick a random one. Let's pick Akamai security events. Akamai is they provide DDoS mitigation and cloud scrubbing services. So you may want to ingest that data into Sentinel to maybe have alerts and correlate it with other tables. So if this is Akamai and this is the data connector, remember what I told you is there's many different ways to connect the data. In this method, it says that you need a Linux syslog agent configuration. So I'm assuming that what this is going to do is this is going to want for you to establish and build a syslog collector, which you kind of already know how to do. And then you want to send your Akamai security events to this syslog collector, okay? And that's basically it. So you probably have to poke a hole in your firewall rules. You want to make sure you want to whitelist Akamai, right? You think about it, only allow Akamai to send those syslog on a special port that you map to port 514 to that syslog collector. When it comes in, the syslog collector will see it and then send it up to Azure Sentinel, okay? Now, if it's coming via syslog, then you're going to have to parse it a little bit better. But if it's coming via Ceph, it shows up in another table called the Ceph log, okay? So syslog and Ceph shows up in two different tables, okay? So it says follow these steps to configure a Ceph collector and syslog messages. So probably it's telling you to point your port to this syslog collector and then just send it up. So you set up a SIM, right? You provision your connector, a Ceph sample connector, and then you go through the documentation. It's probably going to have you, Akamai will send their events through the internet, it has to go through a firewall, right? So it has to go through the internet, go from Akamai services, go to the internet, hit your firewall. So you need to open up, either port 514, or you may need to, poke a special port like 1514, and then it maps to 514 on the collector, okay? And if you want to take it further, you can encrypt that session, maybe enable TCP because it's UDP by default. So enable, have a list on TCP, or add some TLS certificates to it so that only Akamai can send logs to it. But I don't even know if Akamai supports TLS. So, you only want to use TLS if the server supports it. But you can have UDP be on 514 and then have TCP with TLS as well. And then it can kind of use either or. All right. So this is just an example of Akamai, right? And we're going to go through and just look. Something like a Microsoft service as well. We've already pre-built the data connector, so you don't actually have to do much. You just go to open connector page and then literally just checkmark what you want and then apply the changes or click connect, right? You just have to have the necessary privileges to enable that connector. Okay, that's all you need to make sure. Privileges is going to be very important to enable the connector. So someone does have to have the rights in this area as well as the area that you want to connect. So, with any Microsoft product, usually there's a data connector, and some of the stuff you're going to, when you see it, you can actually check mark and have it also create an incident so that when the incident is created by the other product, you can just ingest it and then create it here. Okay. So let's look. I'm just going to scroll down. I'm going to try to find another connector. Let's look at Proofpoint. Proofpoint's pretty popular with my customers. So if you want to connect Proofpoint data, right? Let's say on-demand security events. What's that connector look like? Is it a syslog? No, it's an API WebSocket. So to deploy this one would be a function app. It actually will deploy an app that will go and you populate the keys, and it's going to connect Proofpoint data and ingest it into Sentinel for you. So what does that look like? Well, it says follow these steps to create it. So I'm just going to click on this link, follow the steps, and you see right here, this is the query and log analytics. I think I clicked on the wrong one. So let me see, optional steps to connector. Let's see. Enable and check log API. Oh, there's a button here to just deploy it. So click the button, and then when you click on the button, you're going to be brought to a custom ARM template script that you populate your variables you need. So let's say I want to put it into a resource group. Here it is. This is the name of the function. This is going to be the name in our app. When you want to search it within Azure, that is the name. The workspace ID. That is the workspace ID of your Sentinel environment. You need to populate that. The key, the Proofpoint cluster ID, and the token, which I don't have, so you're going to have to populate that. But the workspace ID and key, I can tell you how to get that. That would be back in Azure Sentinel, go into settings, and then go into workspace settings over here, click on agent management, and you'll get those here. All right, guys. So again, you can populate this into the parameters. That's going to let you spin it up. And hopefully it connects, and then your data is ingesting. When your data ingests, then you're going to go back over here to the Proofpoint connector. Let me go back here. Go back to data connectors. We're going to go back to the Proofpoint logs. We're going to go open connector page. And how do you search it? Well, you just go to the next tab. So I'm just making sure there's nothing else. So they deploy the function app. There's some instructions there. Click on next step. We already provide a workbook you can search against, as well as Proofpoint queries as well. So you have the ability to query your logs. And as you can see, if you have a custom connector, like it goes to API, a lot of times it's going to store it into a custom table that you can just simply query. And this one's called Proofpoint POD. Okay. And that way you can just type Proofpoint POD and then now just go to KQL and just query it and just build your query. All right. So that's another way to connect data, is through an API with a connector like this, right? Another way to connect data, let's just see the existing connectors we have already available to you, right? We have 98 connectors, but a lot of these connectors, like that Proofpoint API connector, I usually just go in there and then look at the code and then just kind of pull the pieces I want, the code snippet, and then kind of fashion my own connector using that and build my own function app, right? We are constantly building connectors, but if you don't want to wait for that connector to be available, crafting your own might not be too difficult if you know PowerShell or Python or something like that. Okay. All right, guys. So I'm going to just go through syscos, usually syslogs, ceplogs, common event logs. That's going to be going through syslog. DNS is coming from your servers. Okay. Or, you know, your DNS service. But this is going to be a server agent. Forcepoint, you know, F5, a lot of these can be syslog. Some of them will connect to API. Like another API connector would be like Amazon. So Amazon and getting those CloudTrail logs into here is going to be important. That way you ingest those CloudTrail logs and then you can query it. Okay, so open the connector page, and the simple premise, the similar idea is you would provide your Microsoft ID, external ID, but look, this is a little bit different. You just have to provide a role inside the IAM in Amazon, and inside IAM there's a role, and then you have to allow CloudTrail's read-only access for this to get access to it. And then so you provide the information and you add it, and then the data is going to be connected. Okay. So you want to put your AWS role here and then search it, and now the data is connected. Okay. How else would we connect into Sentinel? Let's see. Talked about that. Let's talk about the workbooks. That's another way I can kind of show you how you can get data into Azure Sentinel. So if I go to add workbook, and I'm just going to click on edit. The reason I'm doing this is just to show you all the stuff available to you in the workspace, in the workbooks, I'm sorry. So logs right here, pretty straightforward. You have access to your logs, right? So you still build a similar query as normal, right? Once you build your query, you can then take this query and then maybe do a summarize by capital S, source system. I probably need to do a count. I don't have much. Darn. Let's see. But then you could just do some chart, some pie chart, but it's going to be 100%. But you get the gist, okay? Pretty straightforward. Here's the cool thing, Azure Resource Graph. So Azure Resource Graph, you can actually query the Azure Resource Graph and type in whatever you want. Here's an example, resources, where virtual machine. So we'll go back over here, we'll paste that query. You can literally, if you point to the Azure Resource Graph, you can then type in a query and then find out what resources are available. So let's see what resources I have available, which is none, because I'm probably not pointed to a subscription that has resources. Yeah, let me use another tenant I have. We're gonna add workbook. I do want to show you what it looks like. Oh. So we click add, go to query, and we're going to go to Azure Resource Graph, paste that query, run it, and here's a virtual machine. So that is a virtual machine that you now can query. So you can use this in your workbook, right? Does that make sense? So imagine that now you can query all this, and then when you query it, you can have a sort of idea of all the machines, what the utilization is, correlating that with other tables, right? Do you kind of see where it's going? So this is a data source you have available to you as well, that you don't actually have to go ingest those logs. Another data point you have available is the Azure Resource Manager query. Now, it's going to require a certain path, but the cool thing is if you provide the subscription and that details, you can query your features, your management groups, your subscriptions, your resource groups, your tags, your policy templates, where you can see which resources have certain billings or certain policies set up, or which policies you need to configure, or which subscriptions are not adhering to policies. So from a security perspective, you can get a better grasp of all the policies just leveraging the Azure Resource Graph. And this is all free. This is all free for you to query, okay? Azure Data Explorer, right? So you can actually define a cluster name. So I'm gonna type in help, right? And this is a public data set you can query. We'll do samples. And the table is gonna be, I think COVID-19 is usually what I query, limit 10. And there's the COVID-19 table that you can query, right? And then you can then summarize by maybe count by country. And there you go. And then you want to then sort by count, right? Does that make sense, guys? All right. So Data Explorer allows you to query those data points, through the workbook. Okay. JSON, you can provide whatever JSON data point you want, static JSON, and it shows up here. So if you have your own JSON elements and you want to use it in the workbook, you can literally just populate a JSON table. So you just type in something like name Bob, and you run this query, and you got name Bob, right? And if you need another one, then you simply have to add maybe a comma, name Sam. Let's make it an array. I think it wants it as an array, guys. I think it wants an array, which is brackets, guys. There we go. Name Bob, name Sam. You want to add more data points. Age 30. You got to put a comma up here. Age here. 20. Put a comma, right? If you know JSON, you got to put commas after each object or key value pair. And there we go. Bob, Sam. Now that we have that, we can then visualize that query and do a pie chart. Another data point would be merge. Merge just merges two tables together. It's like a join. Okay. Parameters. You can provide a parameter, which is you basically take the parameter and then do a query on the parameters exactly as it says. A custom endpoint. What's a custom endpoint, guys? You can literally query an API and then have it populate in the workbook. So if you have an API and you can query it, sometimes if they have a course, that protection where they only allow certain web services to access it, then it might have trouble getting access to that. But for the most part, you could just put the custom endpoint, identify as a get, post, whatever, and then identify the URL, and then get the data set. Okay, does that make sense? Matter of fact, let's just go find one. Let me show you. So let's find a public API data point. Let's find a public API we can query. Let's do animals. Anime. All right, let's look at this one. Let's look at the URL scan, anti-malware URL scan data point. It needs the API key though. They need API key. Let's look at anime. It doesn't need API key. API request will appear here. Okay, let's do Naruto. All right, so let's get this data point. This is the API. We're going to copy it. We're going to go over here. We're going to paste the URL here. Let's run the query. We could make sure course is enabled. There we go. So don't send standard correlation header. So, we don't need it because it's a public API, and you get the data point here. All right. So now we have the data, and be sure to check that if it has that little error. You always want to have course if it's a private API, guys. But this is public. We don't really care. Now we have the parameters, and you see this, this is not usable data. We've got to make it usable data. So go to results settings tab, go to JSON path, and we've got to make this usable data. All right. I think results. It looks like results is the right one. See, the reason I know that is whenever you see the bracket request hash, this is the hash of the request, the cache, but then the results is here, right? So we need that. So $.results is the path I'm thinking. And then yeah, that gives us the results we want. I'm going to change it. Let's change it over to grid mode so that we can at least just see what the data is coming in. So here we go. So we got the image URL, we got the URL, we got the title, we got the airing, synopsis, right? There's the data. So now that we have that data and we have the results, we're done. I mean, we've mapped that data. It can be used, right? And if you want this image to be a clickable image, then you would just go to column settings, go to, the image URL. Let's say the image URL, change this column rendering to is it link? Yeah, link settings, need to open, we'll open the URL link label, fly, save it. And there we go, guys. We got a link to every single picture here. Does that make sense, guys? This literally was a JSON element that we brought in that we can query. Does that make sense, guys? Okay. So that's a custom endpoint. It could be a private API, right? But you got to make sure you post the right API key and things like that, the header. I'm not going to go into that, but just to give you an idea. Custom resource provider. So you can actually build a custom resource provider and then actually pull data from you. So you actually build a resource provider and then actually query it here as well. Let's look at Azure Health. That's another query. So you can look at the Azure Health of your nodes, right? Yeah, that's pretty cool, right, guys? Azure Health of your devices, right? Workload health, change analysis, all that is available to query within this workbook. Okay. Another thing I want to mention, if you wanted to query the Azure Data Explorer within Azure Sentinel, it took me a while to figure it out. So I'm going to share you this tip. Sometimes you might want to query Azure Data Explorer, and this is how you do it. You go over here, you type in ADX, you type in the URL, you type in this, type in help.kusto.windows.net/samples, the database. So it's going to be first, this will be this is the cluster name, right? That's the cluster. This is the database. Then you specify the table name, okay? Right? Cluster, database, table, okay? And if you're thinking about doing privileges and privilege access, you can scope it by cluster, database, and table as well. So you can say these people have access to this stuff, and this people have access to this stuff, okay? So that is the query, and then you type in COVID-19 like we did before, the limit 10, and there we go, the data. And then we do the same thing. So if you want to query your Azure Data Explorer, if you got it stored over there at another repository or storage area, you can query that data here. You can also query external tables here too. So you can do external table. It could be a JSON data point. It could be the table and just ingest it here. But you're going to have to map the columns, right? You're going to have to provide the schema. It doesn't really know the schema, doesn't know how to paint it, doesn't know how to populate the query. So you might have to provide the schema so you can tell it the columns you want to populate. Okay. So external table, external data, look it up and you can query that as well. Okay. Other ways to query data. Let's talk about like a PowerShell script, a Python script. I'm going to show you that too. Okay. So we're going to go to Python. We're going to type in Azure Monitor because Azure Monitor is kind of using the log analytics, right? And that's where, a lot of these already made code is available. And we'll just type in PowerShell. I'm just going to type it just to get to the spot I'm looking for. Ingest data, maybe data ingest. Azure Monitor PowerShell ingest data. Here we go. Azure Monitor HTTP Data Collector API. So this is us connecting to the API of log analytics and feeding data into a custom log table. Okay. So how do we do that? Again, we do an HTTP request, we provide the data, and then it stores it in log analytics workspace, where then Azure Sentinel maps everything and does all the correlation and does all the automation and integration and all that jazz. All right. Let's look at how to do it. So if you look here, you need to have authorization in order to actually feed logs into Sentinel, or log analytics. You need to know the shared key signature. It has to be a signed it has to be signed in order to populate that data. It's not just going to be an API key. So keep that in mind. So when you do a request body, you actually will populate your key value pairs and then just do a comma to kind of split them up. So you would do, name, value, name, age value, whatever, and you build your key value pairs. This right here is the array, right? So this is the array, and then this is the going to be the object. This is going to be one value. So you literally just build another one like that, and you put like a little comma right here, and you do another one, and you put a comma right here, right? That's sort of how you're doing it, similar to what you have down here, where you have, that's one row item, and this is going to be another row item. So you're feeding JSON to us, okay? So now when you're feeding all the JSON to us, this is the script. So there's already a pre-provided script that's available to you to update. So let's go ahead and do that. If you want to follow me, go ahead. If you don't want to follow, just skip along. But we're going to just go ahead and just build a script. Okay, guys? So let's just paste that. And let's look. We need a customer ID number. All right, let's go get a customer ID number. Let's go to workspace setting. Let's get our information. There, workspace ID. We're going to go back into log analytics, and we're going to paste that. And then we need the shared key. We need the key to upload that data. Okay. Copy that. Paste that in the PowerShell script, like so. Paste. You guys got that? You guys with me? We have the workspace and the shared key. Now we need to add data, right? And the data, they have already provided the JSON. They've already provided the JSON. So if they provided the JSON, what does that mean? These values will populate the way it's showing up here. So let's not mess with it right now. But I'm going to tell you right now, this my record type, let's change the name to TeachJing demo. So you know you're going to find it. It's not going to show up as this. And when we do it, you're going to see why. The timestamp field, this optional field you can use for timestamp to kind of build the start of collection, like the start of submission, like when you actually submitted the data, when it was ingested, so you can kind of see the timeline and see how slow it is for log analytics to ingest that data and what that gap is, that time gap. So if you want to put that, populate the field. This function's already built that builds that signature for you, so ignore it. Click on the minus key, ignore it, right? Post log analytics data, that's already been pre-built for you as well. So, but what it does, it will post to the API. It will build the signature, right? It will build the signature, post to the API, build the signature, build the method, build the URL string, get the header key. And then this bad boy is the actual, after you build everything and you get everything set up, it will call this URI, it will call this method, it will post that content type, which is the content type is application JSON right there. Okay, application JSON, which is that content type. The method, it's a post right there, so the method's post. The URI here, that's going over here. The header here, this header is going over here. And the body was up there when you build that JSON, right? And that's it. Then this right here is going to post that data, okay, to the shared workspace, okay? Now you're saying, I thought this was the post. I thought this was doing the work. You're right. This is calling a function, post log analytics data. We provide the parameters or arguments for the function, right? So we provide a customer ID, a shared key, and the body, which is that JSON, and the log type. Log type was the name of the log, which we call TeachJing. So this function, let's just close it, and basically this thing is calling that function. Does that make sense, guys? So literally, if you want to post your own data, you need the signature function, you need the post log analytics function, and then you can post your own data in this script, stick it in a scheduled job, and boom, it's going. I mean, that's it. Does that make sense, guys? All right. So let's post this data. Run it. Done. It's posted. Don't believe me? Let's go look. And as you can see, doesn't show up. Doesn't show up. Let's give it a bit. Let's give it a bit. Oh, what do we have here? It didn't show up in the list, but it is available. All right, so if you have no data yet, it takes a bit of time. It's building the table, and then the log is already there. It's in the pending state, so it's like waiting in a queue. Once the table is done being built, it'll ingest the log. Then it'll be a lot faster, but the table has to be built first because it's never been built, right? So just give it a sec, and should be coming in any moment now. All right, guys. So it took a few minutes to build that table and start ingesting the logs, but now the logs are coming in. So as you can see, time generated came in, the string values came in, and these are the custom columns. Okay, see the custom columns that was built out. So what do we want to do now? Well, we want to go back and add our own custom columns to the same data set. Okay, so don't make another log type, guys, because you don't want to have too many custom logs showing up in your thing. So just use the same one and then just delete this element here. Or maybe we just keep it. We'll just keep it, guys. And let's do a string value. Let's do a name Bob. We'll do age 42. We'll do Mary true. Date value good is going to be ID. We'll just call it ID. Let's just copy and paste it. All right, guys. So now that we copy and pasted it, let's call this person Sam. I don't know, whatever you want, guys. Just do whatever. The goal is we just want to populate data. We submit it. Submit it a few times. So we're sending custom logs to the log collector. It's going to show up in that same table, but it might have different columns. These new entries are going to have different columns. So you can have many different columns, and you're sending it normalized. It's already been structured. While we wait for that to load, if you go back to that documentation where you copy that, you see this. If you guys like C, there's C, there's C++ or C Sharp. I'm sorry. So if you guys like C, there's C Sharp code that you can look at to do the same thing. So it's actually just written in C. Now, Python, this is Python 2 example. So if you will have to change it to Python 3 if you want to use that format, but Python 2, same premise, build the JSON key, build the signature point, and then post that data via Python. So if you guys like Python and you guys want to put it in a cron job or a scheduled job and just send it directly through your syslog collector through that Python script, you could do that instead of having it go through syslog or cephlog, inject it through a custom log. Okay. Oh, here's Python 3 too. Here's JavaScript. So if you guys like JavaScript, it's available there as well. Many different ways to ingest that data. Another way to ingest data is you could probably put it on a data collector or Azure Data Explorer. So let me show you Azure Data Explorer. See, there's so many ways to collect data, guys. Azure Data Explorer. So if you want to store data longer, but you still want the data available through log analytics, Azure Data Explorer might be a better alternative option because it's actually used by AI, data analytics folks to query large data, petabytes of data, right? And the pricing model might be to your advantage. Okay. So Azure Data Explorer, really, it's just another sort of data cluster, and you just store your logs there. So if you're thinking about putting your logs there, I suggest normalizing that logs. If you have a lot of logs, don't send all your logs there. If you have like metrics or samplings, maybe just get samplings for that day and then kind of take the the daily sampling and then filter those logs to a smaller number, because you might not need every single entry, if you just want to take an average of the day, if that's comfortable with you. So whatever means, put it in the data management here. That's where I'm storing a lot of my stuff that you're querying with TeachJing, is through this Azure Data Explorer cluster. So let me show you what that looks like. So if you want to go to aka.ms/KQL Data Explorer, again, this is going to be a free area for you to kind of mess around, query, and just mess with the sample data. But if you add my cluster, teachjing.westus.kusto.windows.net, you have access to my sample data here. See my MITRE catalog, which you can query here. Okay. And you don't actually have to add it as a cluster here. You can actually also do cluster teachjing.westus.database MITRE, security data, and then do table MITRE catalog. I think this will work, or maybe there might be another way. That worked. But I think you could do it this way too. Yeah, I think both ways work. Yeah. All right, guys. And maybe you could even do it this way. That works too. Whatever you want. Many different ways to do table, do a dot, whatever method you can query it. Now that you know that's how you kind of query your data. But how do you add data here? How do you add your own data? And what kind of data can you add? Well, again, you can store the data in a storage repository and just use that data and just pull from that. But if you don't want to do that, you want to store it in this cluster and have it indexed and have it normalized, then you would have to store here and ingest it here. So you would just go to here, go to your cluster. When you go to Explorer here, you go to type in Data Explorer, you're going to have to build your own Data Explorer cluster that you can then access. So you need to build your own Data Explorer cluster, which then you're going to get your cluster string, your URL string. Okay. Then when you build it out, you're gonna add data here. So ingest new data, okay, and then you put database. What's the database you want to put in, guys? Right? If you want to put a new database, you've got to go build a new database in your cluster you have built out. So you can build more databases, and then set privileges there, right? You build your table here. So you have a table. You want to put in a table or create a new table. Let's do a new table, right? You put that new table here. And then you put the source type. So again, here, blob. Is it a file, right? Is it a blob container? Is it I don't know what ADLS is. Or maybe Event Hub. So maybe you're referencing Event Hub, so it can basically subscribe to that Event Hub feed and then just ingest that feed right into Data Explorer. We're going to do file to show you what file types it supports. Oh, what file type does it support? File to upload, add up to 10 items, up to 1 GB uncompressed each size. Doesn't say what file, but I know it supports CSV, JSON. Let's see. It's a lot of formats. See, Okay, we got the Apaches, Avro, CSV, JSON, multi-JSON, Parquet, oh, PSV, raw, TSV files, text files, yeah, a lot of different file types. And if it's zipped up, we support it too. It'll have to unzip it and then parse it. It'll maybe take a little bit longer, but we can support that too. But the goal is now you ingested the static data or data that you've brought somewhere else that you want to use as a data point. You would put it here and then set the schema of that data point, map out the schema saying that this column is this column, right? Then you go back into Azure Sentinel, and then this is where you would do it again, guys. You would go here, type in help.husto.windows.net, and then you would do slash, guys. You gotta do slash your database. We'll do samples dot COVID-19 limit 10. And that's it, guys. Yours is going to be different. Your string is going to be that Kusto string, okay? Does that make sense, guys? If you want to query log analytics stuff on Azure Data Explorer, you're going to have to figure out that workspace. There's a documentation around that, okay? Let me actually show you logic apps, because I'm going to show you how easy it is. If you don't know programming, and that PowerShell is kind of scary for you, let me show you logic apps just real quickly. We're going to go from scratch, guys. We're going to do a log analytics from scratch and log it right into the workspace. Let's do it. So open up logic apps. You don't know what it is? Just type logic apps and type in add consumption. Logic apps charges on a consumption-based model, so don't be worried. If you don't run it, then it won't do anything, okay? So we're gonna do a resource group. So pick whatever resource group, guys. I'm gonna do a test resource group. We're gonna do TeachJing logic app. Review, create. Once it's done validating your parameters, click create. It will build the logic app. Logic app is GUI based programming. It's, like I said, the most simplest way I can put it. We go to the resource and we're going to go recurrence model. I'm going to go back to the templates real quick. You can do when the message is in a bus, when you get an email, many different trigger points to trigger the logic app. If you store it in a file, if you put on Event Hub, if you get a tweet, if you can even make a logic app API and then send JSON data and have that go into Sentinel. So you kind of do all the complexity here and then just set up your own easy API. We're going to do recurrence. That's the easiest. We'll do every 3 minutes. Okay, guys? And let's log to Sentinel. So what do we want to log into Sentinel? Let me think. We're not going to log to Sentinel. Where do we log, guys? We're going to log into log analytics. So type log analytics, okay? And then we're going to pick, which one's this one? Data collector. There's two of them. One is for querying data, but we want to do the data collector because we want to send data. So the data collector connector, send data. You're going to have a connection name. That's okay. You can create it. So we're going to put log analytics connector. You guys remember how to get your workspace ID and key? Okay, go get it. Go and get that key. Okay, guys, go get the key. And agent management, ID. Where's my logic app? Put that ID here, put the key there, paste it in. Now you have your connector established. How easy was that? Now, the JSON request body. Well, let's cheat and let's just go into our thing here, copy that JSON body and paste it there. Does that make sense, guys? Custom log name. We don't want to put it in another table. We want to use this same table. But we need a way to identify this one. So let's say name is logic app. Logic app 2. A way to just identify that it's flowing through logic app and you guys are seeing it flow, right? Does that make sense, guys? You can also add the time generator field here. We're not going to do that. Maybe you want to add another flow. Maybe you want an Outlook email to email you when it's done uploading or something like that, right? So you can just go to Outlook and then just do like, click on Outlook and then send email. Right here, just send email when it's done sending it, right? It goes in it'll go top down, just each task one by one. If one fails, it stops, okay? But we're not gonna do the connect to Outlook. We're just gonna keep it simple. We're gonna save it and then we're gonna run it. Wait here, do not click around. Don't be fast. Watch what happens. You get check marks. It ran through this. Interval, 3 minutes. Okay. Send data. Here's the input. This is the input I provided, right? That's the body. So it already kind of provided that JSON body, right? And then here's the output, raw output. It made the API call and it got a 200 response back. Guys, we just logged 2 log analytics to Sentinel with a logic app. Okay? Does that make sense, guys? And then it shows up where you can query it. All right, guys. So what did you think? How was it? Hopefully you know various methods to ingest logs into Sentinel. We labbed a few. And yeah, have fun. Your homework. Ingest some logs into Sentinel and make some queries and make a workbook, okay? And feel free to like and subscribe and comment below on anything else you want me to talk about or any questions you have. Click the bell so you get notified. And thank you for watching. Stay safe, guys.